Today, Fashion in the Automobile is what we're here for. They are a touring exhibit, a vintage fashion show and presentation, and a forthcoming book. Their exhibit in 10 eras is a virtual drive down memory lane by decade and has been on display at museums, art galleries, and dealerships. They also conduct vintage fashion shows, teas, and presentations for such groups as the Detroit Yacht Club, the Lorenzo Cultural Center, and numerous associations, car clubs, retirement homes, libraries, and historical societies. Let me introduce the fashion curator of Fashion in the Automobile, Lynn Anderson.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. Well, can everybody hear me all right? I am mic'd. I've got a gentleman here in the back room controlling my sound for me. You can kick up my music a little bit too if you like. We'll take you back on a journey here. Thank you. Well, welcome to Fashion Through the Decades. As she said, my name is Lynn Anderson, and together with my partners, Victoria Mobley and Elaine Vermeersch, it's my pleasure to be your host as we take a journey through fashion in the decades. Pay attention to the U-turns that the fashion will take, because what's old will become new again. Well, let's take a minute and just look briefly at the Victorian era. Now, the Victorian era was named for Queen Victoria. It comprises almost the entire 19th century. It's also known as the Gilded Age. That's a term coined by Mark Twain, actually. It was a period of widespread economic growth as we become the world's leader in industrialization and wealth. Now, the Gilded Age was a major one in terms of change. The Industrial Revolution affected almost every aspect of daily life. It had a large impact on us and the world. So if you think a minute, you have improved transportation and communication. This allows us as people to share information more quickly. Department stores pop up in urban areas. This allows fashions to be available to the masses. And we have mail order catalogs now. This allows the people in the rural farming areas, such as here in Troy, to access the latest trends. Fabrics and laces now become machine made, and they're finally affordable. And as you can see, the fashions changed dramatically over the period. You started with hoop skirts in the 1860s, going into a bustle gown, and then the huge leg of mutton sleeves of the 1890s. Some major changes through the eras. In fact, I'd like to call out our first model, Connie. Can come out, and Connie is wearing a leg of mutton gown, typical for 1890. This, by the way, is a reproduction gown. This is made by a company right here in Michigan called Recollections in Alpena. And they do wonderful reproduction gowns. Now, the hat that Connie's wearing is authentic to 1890s. That is a woven horsehair toque, complete with the feathers. And she's got, 5 hat pins to hold that in. Women's hair was big then because the hat sat high on the hair. Later, you'll find that the hats will go down lower on the crown of the head, but right now they're sitting way up high on the head. That's why the hat pin's in there. By the way, I have a theory on hat pins. Once we got rid of hats and hat pins, we started getting larger evidence of rape in young women. I think we need to bring hats and hat pins back. The woman's #1 defense against an amorous male is an 8-inch hat pin. That'll keep them at bay, won't it? But now let's go into the Edwardian era. This starts in 1901 when King Edward takes the throne. So this is the beginning of the automobile, and the world will never be the same. You know, one essayist wrote this down, quoted this back then, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it. The automobile changed our dress, our manners, our vacation habits, the shape of our cities, and our positions in intercourse. Wait a minute. Back then, intercourse meant conversing. Where were your minds at? Now, people are more mobile now. They're traveling greater distances. There's a real prosperity at this time. Do you know between 1896 and 1930, there were over 1,800 automobile manufacturers? Very few survived. 1,800. There were quite a few. Now here in rural Troy Township, we see the arrival of the DUR, the Detroit United Railway. which now enables people to live in one place and work in another. The DUR becomes a very quick, reliable way for farmers to send their poultry and dairy to Detroit. Here in this picture, these are passengers waiting at the DUR at the Sunnycrest Dairy Farm right here at Livernois and Waddles, right outside the door. And they are in their Edwardian, the ladies are in her walking suits, and they are ready to board the train. Now fashions, of course, had to be modified, right, to accommodate this newfangled way of travel. So dusters were worn over the clothes to protect them from all the dust and the dirt of the roads. Hats are now closer to the head, as we were just talking about, and they're held in place with a very wide scarf tied under the chin. This keeps them on their head. Oh, and the skirt lengths start rising a little bit too, because now we're seeing ladies in the cars driving, and they have to shift gears and reach the floor pedals. And you know, and they even have to push out the stuck cars too. Remember, the roads are all muddy then, they're getting stuck. We're also seeing early forms of brassieres taking the place of corsets. They're easier to wear in an automobile. So cars are being marketed to women now at this point. In fact, this is an electric car ad here, totally saying any woman could run the car safely. Yes, it was a little sexist by today's standards, but that was the norm back then. And here's Alice Ramsey, God bless her. She drove from New York to San Francisco in this car with her fellow women in 1909. Can you imagine? It took her weeks to get there. And there she is changing a tire in the mud. She wanted to prove that women could do it. Now in the fashion, the bustle is gone and leaner, longer lines start appearing. Several layers, some of them asymmetrically placed on the skirt. The necklines are dropping. Remember, Queen Victoria was a prude, so everything was up to here. But King Edward liked to see a woman's bosom, so things opened up a little bit by then. And then, of course, we start seeing a very high waistline up under the bust line. This becomes known as the Empire waist. It's actually a reboot from Regency, from the 1800 Regency look. They bring it back 100 years later. Women wear cotton lingerie or tea dresses, and they can change the slip underneath the dress, changing the look of the dress. And that's what they would launder more frequently, was the slip. So they would have very different looks there. And I do have a tea dress over here on the first mannequin here. This is Maud. She's in a white tea dress with very elaborate lace and trim. This was handmade by the woman too. She actually handmade this herself because there's no labels in this. It's got about 59 hooks and snaps to get into it. And I have a theory that if they were all up the back, that meant the woman was very well-to-do. She had help to get in her garments. This one, most of them are up the side, across, and up the front, which meant she had to get dressed herself. So she could do it herself. That is an authentic hat from the period as well. You have to check these out later after the presentation. But that gives you an idea what they would wear to an event like this, a tea. They would dress like that. And of course, then we have traveling suits. I don't think, yeah, this is a traveling suit right here. Longer jackets and leaner lines. Notice how the hat's sitting deep on her head too. So she doesn't lose it. If she hops in her motor car, she'll put a scarf over that. And look at the evening gowns. Are they not stunning? Lots of layers. I have an Edwardian evening gown from Paris. It's got 4 or 5 layers on it. It's amazing. And of course, hats, the hair starts getting a little more casual. They're putting feathers in their hair or headbands. Today's girls are not that far off from the Edwardian years. They were wearing headbands back in then and bows in their hair, such. But beautiful lines and looks. I love it. Now, we already talked to Maud. She's really silent. She doesn't say much. By the way, and you gentlemen in the audience, I do notice I have a few. Men's frock coats were still the correct formal day wear. Do you know the tuxes today have not changed in 100 years? You men can still wear the same coat and fit in with this era. The only difference on the day jackets is they button 1 notch higher on the breastbone. But that's pretty much the same jackets, and tuxes are identical. The only difference is today you might wear a cummerbund. Back then they would wear a vest under their jackets. But a tuxedo hasn't changed in 100 years. The men are so lucky. Now, World War I changes fashion just as it changes the whole world. Women stop buying corsets to free up metal for the war effort. This single step liberates 28,000 tons of metal. Enough to build 2 battleships. Major contributor to the decline of the corset. You wonder why it disappeared. By the time the men return home from the trenches, they suffer culture shock. They leave a nation of women in hobble skirts and corsets, and they come home to women in knee-length skirts and brassieres. The grace and gentility of the Edwardian era disappears at that point. But you know what? Thanks to modern technology and the films and shows today like Titanic and Downton Abbey, how many Downton watchers we have, the Edwardian style is back. And you can go into almost any store in the mall today and find something that looks Edwardian, be it a lace top or a beaded top, anything. Thanks to these shows, they have kept it alive. And I love that because we can look period without having to invest in real period garments. So let's go into the Roaring '20s. You'll love it. The '20s are heralded the Jazz Age and Prohibition. It's the most daring decade. This revolutionizes the world. Prohibition begins in 1919, and within 10 years, illegal liquor becomes the second biggest business in Detroit after automobiles. You know, in 1920s, it brought in $215 million a year. That's 1920 money. The water here carries 75% of all the liquor supplied to the United States during the entire time. In fact, there are 15,000 speakeasies in Detroit alone. Major. Now, meanwhile, out here in Troy Township, cash farming is taking off. So the farmer has more options now. They can have dairy, produce, vegetables, poultry. And with the promise of better crops, and of course, now the ability to commute thanks to the DUR, population here doubles. Like the Maddox family here, right here, clearly out enjoying their Model T. And their farm here, this was taken on Big Beaver, just west of Rochester Road. Isn't that amazing? I wish I could go back to see what that looked like back then. And at this time, too, we see one-room schoolhouses giving way to 2, 4, or 8-room schoolhouses now. So we have a picture here of the teachers at the Poppleton School. And this is commemorating the opening of the new building on Big Beaver and Crooks. And they're in their 20s outfits. I love her embroidered dress right there and their bobbed hair. You gotta love it. Now, meanwhile, auto manufacturers are really beginning to market their cars to women. The independent, the modern women, as they called them then. Ads here reflect all the self-reliance of a woman having her own car. I love this one. For the woman who represents the ideal American womanhood. Is this girl smarter than a million men? And buy your wife a Ford. You gotta love it. I love seeing this trend now. We're starting to see this. Now in the fashion scene, boy, by the time World War I ends, women now are used to this freedom and independence. So their clothing maintains this loose, shapeless fit. It's like a wartime masculinity, really. It's a very flattened bust line, and we have extremely drop waist, or no waist at all. Many of them, the waistlines go. They dip down, and the hemlines, of course, rise up. And the nautical look is very popular in women and children, men too. They're all out there wearing the sailor look. I think that's a holdout from World War I. They want to emulate their men. And in fact, this is my partner Victoria's mother in her little sailor outfit. She is now, in December, she will turn 101. She is still with us. One of the first women automotive engineers in the 30s when women weren't doing it. She's definitely a forerunner. You gotta love it, though. Now, this is the era of the flapper, too. I mean, look at the flappers here. This is great. They all got their little cloche hats on. And my goodness, those hemlines, scandalous. They're showing their limbs. They wear makeup now. We're starting to see makeup on women. And before that, it was considered very loose to wear makeup. The hair is cut in the short bobs. They have very long cigarette holders, and they drink in public. Now, the ease of movement was better to dance the night away, to dance at Charleston, at blind pits and speakeasies, like the Boathouse at the Garwood Estate, where my own grandmother, and this is my grandmother, she would actually, her mother would check her to leave the house. She had to have her corset on. As soon as she got to the Boathouse at the Garwood Estate, she'd take it off and check it with her coat. She definitely bobbed her hair here, and boy, did my great-grandma have a fit about that. We have one of our flappers here, and this is Elise, and she's in this is an authentic flapper dress. Notice it's even cut out so that the girl can dance. It's very heavy. It weighs about 5 pounds, which is why we retire it, because the netting is starting to get brittle. You cannot leave these hanging on hangers. If any of you have a flapper dress in your closets, take it off the hanger. I actually store this in a Ziploc bag opened up just to absorb the weight of it. And that's an authentic cloche with the egret feathers on it. And that was definitely a major dress in the day. Boy, the girl had to be very wealthy to afford something like that. Now, meanwhile, the average flapper, like my grandmother, would have worn something like Jess has got on. So let's pull Jess out. And Jess has got a flapper dress on, and this is authentic, as is her cloche hat. That's a real deal, too. And look at it, she's got her cigarette holder and her flapper chains. And she is ready to go over there to the Garwood estate and have a little bathtub gin. I love the little velvet touches in the dress that was sewn into that. She do it? Great. Thank you, Jess. And again, thanks to Downton Abbey again, and also the new reboot of The Great Gatsby, the 20s are the hottest ticket right now. I imagine on Saturday, the Halloween parties will all have flappers in them. Everyone loves the flapper era. And Downton Abbey is going to be premiering here in January, and they are starting up in 1924 when they start up. So it's going to be worth watching to see what the girls come up with. Now, flappers weren't quite the image over there in the UK and England, so they won't get quite the scandalous that we did over here. But because they don't have prohibition over in England, so that wasn't an issue for them over there. But fun times, and I love seeing it rebooted on the screen. Anyway, let's go into the 30s. Now, while the 20s were all about excessiveness, the mood of the 30s was being conservative. The Great Depression obviously had a profound effect on everyone. Millions were out of work, and there was no such thing as collecting unemployment. FDR's New Deal creates the Works Progress Administration in an attempt to put America back to work. Now, here in Troy, many farmers are forced into bankruptcy. The growth is slowing down, but we're seeing subdivisions starting to appear on the farmlands. The township does endure. M150 is built during this time, otherwise known as Rochester Road. It eventually expands from 8 Mile all the way into rural Oakland Township. Now, the auto manufacturers also, they continue to market their vehicles to both men and women trying to sell an automobile. The sleek Art Deco look is big now. This is huge. And you can see the image, you can see the women and the image, and of course, action. They're showing her with her automobile. But sales definitely did slow during this time. Let's face it, people were making do and redoing everything. In fact, on the fashion scene, it's the beginning of ready-to-wear. But for the most part, people are mending, making do with what they had. The bobbed hairstyle, they just let it grow out, and it becomes sleeker with more finger waves. Now, this is a time when the general public escapes their dreary lives and goes to the movies, right? For a dime, or a nickel or a dime, you can go see a movie. And now the golden era of the cinema captivates the nation at this point. Up to this point, we used to get our cues on fashion from over in Europe, England, London, Paris. Now, the ladies are all looking to the silver screen for their fashion now. So we see a major change here. The movies become the glamorous new medium for everyone. Designs worn by the Hollywood stars here become the most copied styles. Claudette Colbert. And actually this, believe it or not, is a very young Lana Turner. This is in the movie 1937, a film they won't forget. And this is when she debuted the sweater look. That became bigger in the 40s, but she was very young there. And we're also seeing such innovations now as zippers in dresses. We didn't have them until this time. And the bias cut method, it's a method of cutting material, like this is a bias cut dress here, and it clings to the body and falls on a 45-degree angle. Fabulous. The gowns are backless and satin, totally elegant. It is definitely the signature style when you look back at the era. In fact, I am wearing, and I see if I can step out here with my microphones, but I'm wearing a 1930s evening gown. It actually has a jacket that comes off. And this was worn by, I believe this was a store-bought gown. It has the remnants of what used to be a tag in the back, so I'm thinking she bought this in a gun. But definitely have my Art Deco pins on and Art Deco influenced jewelry. But it's a beautiful dress, wonderful cut on the sleeves. So, thank you. You gotta love the 30s. It was a beautiful era for women. It was very feminine. Well, but here we go into World War II. Nothing like a war to bring us out of a depression, right? It always works. Whenever we're having an economic downturn, we go to war and everything kicks back in. Well, as the country is recovering from depression, World War II does set in. The men, of course, head off to war. And the women and children have to make a living for their family and help the men by manufacturing war materials. Troy Township women do their part. They roll bandages with the Red Cross, they work in factories, and they work in the fields, supplying the local stores like A&P and Kroger. They have to get that fresh produce to market, even if their men aren't home to do it. Just like Lois Hildebrand here on her tractor. And this is at Maple and Stevenson Highway. It's where her farm was. And the Oliver sisters here are harvesting cabbage on their Troy farm. Never did get the location on that one. We'll have to look that up, Stephanie, where they're from. And of course, the ladies here, the Rosies. How about that? Ladies walking to work and all of a sudden the women start abandoning their dresses and going to trousers and putting their hair up. You gotta love it. I actually talked with a few Rosies. I was part of that Rosie record just this past Saturday at Willow Run. We actually broke the record for the most Rosies. Talked to about, there were 44 Rosies there. And these ladies said, we didn't think we were doing our patriotic duty. We just needed the money. Because the men were getting their money while they were off to war, but the women had nothing at home. So they went to work so they could get some money at home and raise their families while the men were busy fighting. But they didn't think they were doing anything patriotic at the time. They just had to get out there and work. You have to love these ladies. They were so independent. Now, automobile manufacturers are still marketing and selling to women. The ads promote styling and convenience. These are the hot buttons for the independent woman of the day. You know, it pays to buy the leader. They're smart to be different. They're really trying to get that into the lady here. You can do this yourself because their men aren't home. So let's see if we can get the lady into their own automobile. And of course, just as we saw during World War I, fashion during World War II becomes conservative too. The extra material is all being used for the war effort. Dresses are made without any frills or extravagances. We also see a trend toward military-inspired clothing. That's where the shoulder pads came into. They were copying their men's uniforms. See, and then the peplum waists, copying the soldiers' jackets. Yeah, you like this one? There she is, Joan Crawford, in her glory. No wire hangers there. But look at the padded shoulders and the peplum waist. There's Kate. Kate, she actually introduced trousers for women. She did. She actually brought it and made it very fashionable. Women wanted to emulate what they were seeing on the silver screen. See, by the way, the rationing of textiles at this point, we have new fabrics now. We have viscose and rayon is finally introduced at this time. Costume jewelry becomes very popular with celluloid and bakelite. Silk stockings are unavailable, right? But how many of you ladies did this? You take your eyebrow pencil and you draw the line on the back of your leg. This is what they did. You couldn't afford a silk stocking, it was going to the parachutes. Or as you see on some of these ladies, some of them actually wore anklet socks with their heels. And that led to the Bobby Soxer era of the 50s. And by the way, rationing limits the height of your heel, of your high heel, to only 1 inch. You can't wear a high heel. Everything went to the war effort. And of course, like I said, the women become Rosie the Riveters at this point. The hairstyle here becomes known as the victory roll. And it was for factory work to keep the hair out of their faces. But it becomes fashionable and commonplace, and women start wearing it outside the factory. So that hair starts picking up. In fact, as you see, Katharine Hepburn actually has a victory roll on the top of her head at that point too. I love that. And not just Katharine Hepburn, Rita Hayworth wore trousers, and so did Marlene Dietrich. They all introduced trousers to women, and it became very fashionable. I have my Rosie over here on the mannequin to my left, your right. That is a 1940s gown. Actually, that was my mother and dad's neighbor's gown. They gave it to me. It was a plain dress, but she, of course, everything was very conservative. So she went to the office supply and she bought boxes of studs and she studded the dress herself. See, that way she decorated it her own fashion. She gave it her own little flair. But I love the peplum waist on it, and that is an evening gown version, obviously. And the suits also had peplums on them, too, the jackets, as the women were working. Isn't that a great look? But hey, the war's over now. The men have returned home and the baby boom is on. This is a very prosperous era, the 1950s, with the emphasis is on the nuclear family and mass consumerism. The middle class is born during this decade. Families move out to the new suburbs, and the city of Troy is incorporated in 1955. The credit card is created, and everybody loves Lucy on a little invention called a television set. Auto manufacturers create a sensation when they introduce vehicles with all female appointments inside, such as the 58 Dodge La Femme here. This is amazing. It had a floral jacquard interior, a matching umbrella, and a handbag. You see a couple of them up here. And the 57 Cadillac Eldorado had a ladies' compact, a cigarette case, a lipstick holder, a beveled mirror, a notepad, magnetized drinking cups, lambskin carpet, and a perfume atomizer filled with Arpège de l'Avant Paris. Needless to say, it was the most expensive car in America at the time. In 1957, it cost $13,500. That was a lot of money in 1957. But on the fashion scene, women strive to become the well-dressed wife and mother. We have to copy Beaver's mother, right? Doesn't she always bake in a dress? We're always seeing the ladies on the TV shows. They're all dressed with their pearls and they're in the kitchen working. How did they did that? Christian Dior creates an extravagant design of a fitted jacket and a cinched waist and a full calf-length skirt using yards and yards of fabric. You can see it here, some of these. Look at the design on these fabrics. Pleated, full, they had crinoline under them, they were huge. It was called the New Look. And this was a turning point. For decades, women wanted to dress femininely again. They finally could do it. So I'd like to introduce my partner, Elaine, coming out in her Dior look dress. And she's wearing a Dior with the fitted waist and the full skirt. And of course, the crinoline underneath. It makes ladies look great. She, of course, has the prerequisite pearls on. Every woman in the 50s had their pearls. The hair is short at this point. The hair is pin curled. Women can start wearing stiletto heels again with these dresses. Isn't that great? Now, for you men, being conservative is the key. You start emulating your president when Ike introduces the gray flannel suit. Everybody likes Ike. Everybody wanted to be like Ike. But now, influenced perhaps by James Dean and a few of the other movies of the day, teenagers become a force to be reckoned with. They start wearing cuffed blue jeans, white shirts, and black leather jackets. And girls start wearing the poodle skirts. Or in this case, it's got the Eiffel Tower on it. Or the bad girls would have the narrow pencil skirts on and the sweater look. Very tight with the little Peter Pan collars. Hair is ratted and flipped or in a ponytail. And saddle shoes, of course, are all the rage. Everyone has the saddle shoes on. And I understood from my mom that they had to be dirty. You couldn't wear a clean pair. As soon as you bought a new pair, you went out and got them all scuffed up and dirty. You didn't want brand new clean, you get teased like that. Isn't that funny? And of course, as always, Hollywood continues to influence, as we have Marilyn Monroe now, and Audrey Hepburn, and Sophia Loren. And don't forget Jane Mansfield. She wore the world's first push-up bra. Of course, nowhere is the correlation between fashion and automobiles more evident than the Dagmar bumpers of the 50s, translated into the Dagmar bras on the models. Dagmar here was an actress in the 50s. She was like a game show personality. She wore the pointy bras, the conical bras. And at the same time, Cadillac and Chevrolet all had the cone bumpers on those. They called them the Dagmar tips. Yeah, my dad had a 57 Chevy. He said he'd borrow my mother's red lipstick and he would put it around the tips of his bumpers. So I don't know which came first, the bra or the car. Were the women influenced by the cars or were the cars influenced by the women? Don't know, but Dagmar definitely made that look popular. And look, it came back in the 80s when Madonna brought them all back again, didn't it? Everything old is new again. Now, as we move into the modern era and beyond, we see more evidence that fashion is cyclical. It repeats itself every few years. Several looks are seeing a resurgence right now, including elaborate lace, beadwork, and soutache trim. Even the new steampunk movement is resurrecting the Victorian era to a whole new generation of kids. I love that. So here are some of the popular looks of the day. Lace from the Edwardian years, the teen years, and soutache trim. I'm seeing these on tops even at the kids' stores called Forever 21. You could go in and buy these things everywhere. Beaded dresses are huge. I am seeing them everywhere. I've gone to the mall and I can walk into any store and find them. Flapper dresses, drop waists, flutter sleeve. We didn't get to talk about those too much. That's the chiffon dresses they wore in the 30s. Beautiful dresses, and I'm seeing them everywhere. In fact, the Peacock Room down in Detroit across from the Historical Museum has a couple of beautiful versions of that right now. Peplum suits are back, and in tops. The girls today are buying peplum tops, and I love that. Makes everybody look thinner in the waist. Shoulder pads are starting to come back again, hopefully not as big as the broad ones. And circle skirts with netting are huge again, and capris, pedal pushers. I saw those all this summer. I don't think those will ever go out of fashion. I love those. Of course, not everything old is new again. And they call this an improvement? I'm stuck in the 50s somewhere. Well, we hope you've enjoyed cruising through the decades with us. Let's call our models out for one last pass in front here so you can see their outfits. There they are. Let's give them a round of applause, huh? They did a great job. Why don't you three squeeze together? I think the photographers out there want to take some pictures. I'll just stay up here.
Should we come? We can come up.
No, I would not come up. There you go. I don't want anybody to trip and fall. One of our other models did fall a few weeks ago. She had a bad spell, and so she's recovering in a rehab center right now. So don't fall. Don't anybody fall. Well, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for me? Yes. Soutache trim. Yeah, let's see. I don't have it on that dress. It's sort of a curly Q moniker. It's a type of sewing. You just take one line of like a trim piece and you sew it in all these elaborate shapes and forms. And that's called soutache. It's really labor intensive to make by hand. Pardon? No, she is not here today. She had to take her mom to the doctor. Her 101-year-old mom had to go to the doctor today. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes? You can turn the music down. Thank you. Shh. We got a question here on the floor. Thanks.
Dagmar was on a program called the Jerry Lester Show.
Yes.
My father was a plater, and anything that was pointed like that, Ford or anything, my dad brought some of that stuff home when he was plating.
No kidding. Of pointy things.
You still have it? There might be a couple.
There we go. That was something. Thank you. I didn't know that. Yes?
We were wondering about the flapper dress.
Yes.
The weight of it. Is it some sort of chain now?
It's just mesh. It's all hand beadwork on mesh which is why the mesh can get very fragile. So we retire it. It stays only on the mannequin. We don't ever put it on because it can get, the shoulders especially and the neckline get very fragile.
That's the weight of it.
But that is the weight of it. It's about 5 pounds, 4.5 pounds, roughly. It's quite heavy. So when the girl was wearing it, it was quite heavy at the time. She's dancing around. It's a miracle that has survived intact. It really is, hasn't it? Well, anybody else? Yes?
When did the sewing machine come in? Was the average woman able to afford one? And the beautiful white dress here, would she have done this on a sewing machine with an attachment, or would that have all been done by her hands?
Well, some of the embroidery work was probably done by hand, but I'm sure she sewed the pieces together with a treadle sewing machine. I still have my grandmother's treadle. And so that came in way back in the 1900s in the Industrial Revolution is when we saw the treadle sewing machine. In fact, the initial, I just recently saw the very first sewing machine. It didn't have a bobbin, so the stitches didn't lock. And so it kept coming unraveled, and somebody invented the bobbin to lock the stitches, thank God. But yes, and my grandmother's machine still works like a champ too. It still works great. I could use it. Foot power, no electricity necessary. So yes. Anybody else? Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your attention today. Thank you.